Robert, I want to talk something personally. I'd rather not be on the record. Someone from the district attorney's office wants to come on.
I heard what you said.
It's fine. Matters that we need to take up outside the presence of the jury?
Yes, I guess I understand that both sides may have an issue. This is just, well, it's a little bit for planning purposes and some other things, and this concerns the fact that last night I had the opportunity to listen to the latest interview with Ms. Redden, Sarah Redden, and not to get into debate and all, but it would be our contention that, again, it's somewhat different than what she's been saying beforehand. We are making an effort to get that tape transcribed with it and all, and it would be our request, and we're making efforts to do that as soon as possible. I don't know yet how long it would be before doing that, but I think that we need, before she would testify, have a copy of that, because I think we talked about doing a voir dire hearing with her. It's our contention also that there's new issues that have been raised as a result of, if she testifies consistent with this, there's going to be other issues other than just simply the impeachment issue, but it's having to do some things about speculation and all that. The voir dire hearing might be even longer than we had previously anticipated because of that. The other thing I want to bring in connection with that is I think that we have, I believe it was Monday, I think each side presented, and with the consent of the others, copies of the transcripts to you for your review. It occurred to me as I was thinking last night that we probably need to make that an official part of the record, because appellate courts in the future might want to consider what you have been considering with that and all. And I don't believe that it is part of the record. So I think there was one that I had even emailed to you, some others that we may have provided, and I know the state provided some, again with consent. But I think at some point today, probably need to make that officially part, so any appellate action in this case will be able to review all of that.
We can certainly mark it today, or we're going to be doing a voir dire of Miss Redden, and I'll have it before me at that time. I'm happy to mark it at that time and make it part of the record there. I think I have, in fact, I believe this is the printed copy of what you emailed me. I think both sides provided me almost simultaneously. You emailed it and they provided a printed copy. So I have a printed copy of all three transcripts, and if and when we obtain a fourth transcript, we'll add that to this collection. We can mark them as court's exhibits.
And I know that we sent that to the transcriptionist last night, and she was going to tell us by this morning when she anticipated being able to have it complete, but we don't have that. But we haven't heard from her quite yet.
All right. That's fine. I'm assuming that the state's not intending to call Ms. Redden today as a witness.
No, sir, not today. We're just going to have a voir dire hearing on her, and what is different to them is not different to us, and we're just going to have to litigate that out. The issue out, I believe,
right.
I think we all know where we stand on that,
right.
on that issue at this point.
That's fine. It will all be revealed. All right. So we'll just plan accordingly, and it may be helpful if we get to the point where she is going to be the next witness, and we need to make time for the voir dire, if that's at the beginning of the day or the end of the day, that we can send the jury home. I would imagine that we're talking an hour or more from the type of issues that I'm anticipating. So if you'll just let us know, give us some heads up as far as scheduling so that we can plan with the jury.
I sent Ms. Godwin a text yesterday thinking it would be tomorrow based on the progress we made yesterday. I know there's probably some witnesses that will take longer today, so it's kind of like everything else. It's a fluid issue going on through the in terms of timing. But we were thinking tomorrow at the earliest, but if there's some issues with transcribing that and getting that to Your Honor, we can maybe rearrange a little bit. But
right.
We'll
and even
see where we are today.
Excuse me for interrupting, but even if it's at the, even if you anticipate calling her tomorrow sometime during the day, maybe we tell the jury to come in at 10:30 or so, and we take care of that matter, even though she would not be the next sequential witness in your lineup.
And we'll be glad to provide you kind of with a projected outline that we have in terms of witnesses, and if it's
right. And with respect to the transcript, all I would say is that transcript is helpful. I would urge that be produced as expeditiously as possible. I'm not sure that we couldn't make do without a transcript. I'd certainly listen to the audio recording if that was all that I had available to me. So use your best efforts to have a transcript, but I'm not inclined to delay the trial while the transcript is prepared of this matter. The video or the audio would be the best evidence in the first instance. So.
We'll go ahead and get you a copy of that this morning as well. I know you've got the other statement, so we'll get you a copy of the latest one as well, so you can have that.
That would be helpful.
Just to clarify, do you have a transcript of it or just a tape?
Just the tape.
Oh. Which we do have.
All right. Any other matters that we need to take up?
Yes, Your Honor. On behalf of the state, Mr. Brown's basically first sentence or statement yesterday in opening statements was regarding Ronald Anthony and his plea of guilty and his life sentence. State made a decision not to object at that point and probably draw more attention to what was said, but I have prepared a motion in limine at this point to preclude further reference to Ronald Anthony's plea and sentence. If I may approach with a copy of that motion in limine.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I've also retrieved some case law. One, State of North Carolina versus Curley, Kerley, 246 NC 157, and State v. Baskin, 190 NC App 102. If I may approach with copies of those cases. I'll let you review those. But basically, my argument would be that Mr. Anthony's plea to first-degree murder is not relevant to the guilt innocence of this defendant, Travion Smith. He made his decision to plead and take responsibility based on his lawyer's advice, based on the evidence in the case, and quite frankly, I just don't think it's relevant to Mr. Smith's case at the guilt innocence phase. And certainly at the sentencing phase, the comment that he had already taken life without parole, I believe, was an improper statement to be made at that point, and especially in regards to the sentencing phase that may come about. So the case law seems to support that it is not a relevant consideration for the jury. The first case, the Curley case, is a case in which I will fully admit the state tried to introduce evidence of a defendant's plea. But I believe the Baskin case is one in which the defendant intended or attempted to introduce a judicial notice statement.
Mr. Brown?
Your Honor, I'm prepared to make arguments about as if the issue comes up, and I'm willing to. I have a memo of authority about where it could come in. If we intend to bring it up again, which I think there are times that we would, I'd be willing to, at that point, say, Your Honor, I need to be heard, and then make the arguments there. There's several different ways in which I think it could be appropriate and it would come up, particularly when we're talking about witnesses. And there's two ways in which I think it could be appropriate in the guilt innocence case that are likely to come up in this case. And one of them has to do with possible impeachment of any statements that Ronald Anthony made that I think are likely at some point to come into evidence into this case, talking about the various witnesses. The second is I think it's likely to come in when we're talking about witnesses who have an incentive concerning their incentives to testify, that they no longer have an incentive to testify against Mr. Anthony, and now the only incentive they have to testify is against Mr. Smith. I think it's appropriate, and I have been working on memos regarding this too, and I'm prepared to make that argument. If the court wants to say at this point we cannot do it, and if we think the issue is relevant, I could ask to be heard at that point and to make the arguments then when I believe that it would be appropriate at that time.
Well, there are really two issues. One is the taking of a guilty plea. The other is the sentence that was the judgment that was imposed of life without possibility of parole. So with respect to impeachment, of course the state hasn't put on any evidence that would be impeachable at this time with that right, but and I'm not sure that that gives you latitude to forecast evidence that, I think every time I've heard the state reference, particularly Mr. Anthony, there's been some question as to whether he would be called as a witness or not. I don't think we've heard a definitive statement from the state that he will be a witness in this case.
Well, but our point is not only impeachment of him testifying, but if anything he says is done, I have a right under 806, we have a right under 806 to impeach him as we would another witness.
Are you going to seek to exclude evidence that of out-of-court statements from Mr. Anthony, or
Some statements, there may be some statements that we move to exclude, there may be some statements that come in. They don't even necessarily I think when you look at the State v. Kennedy decision, there's some discussion about that. It doesn't even have to be done for the purposes of the truth of the matter asserted. If there are statements that come in of his, then we have the right to impeach it. Doesn't mean that we have to by having that theory. I think there's going to be inevitably some things that Ronald Anthony is going to say that are going to come into evidence with it. That doesn't mean that by impeaching what he says through his record, which we are allowed to do under 806, and that includes under that point, including the fact that he was found guilty and what his sentence is, we are allowed to impeach it just as if he testified. It doesn't mean that by doing that we are conceding that all of his statements come in. There's certainly things that we would object to, and there's certain things with it. But if there are any parts of his conversations and all that come in, I think we have a strong basis for going ahead and impeaching him like we would any other witness at that point, even out-of-state declarant. And as I say, I'm citing Rule 806 for that, and I'm also citing specifically State v. Kennedy, and I'm prepared, as I say, if the issue comes up more beforehand, I'm prepared before I ask a witness specifically those questions and all, to ask to be heard and to say why it is applying in this case here.
And with respect to the sentence or the judgment that was imposed, what's your rationale for that being admissible at this in this stage of the trial?
Well, the rationale for it being admissible is two things that we would argue for that. One is that it is admissible that when you do impeachment, what you're allowed to do, and I believe the case of State v. Lynch, is we're allowed to ask about a witness who does testify, and therefore the same thing is about an out-of-declarant statement. We are allowed to ask the witness what you have been convicted of and what your sentence was. That's clear impeachment about that. I am, right now, I do have a case cite. I'm trying to, right now, but it says that at that point, that's something, if it's something that happened within 10 years about it, and it's not even subject to a 403 analysis at that point, is my understanding of the case. And I am trying to get that case up forward. So that's the rationale for that. The second has to do with a full investigation of witnesses who they anticipate to call, being allowed to explore why they have a greater incentive to testify against Mr. Smith. And it is because one of the cases was already taken care of, and therefore at least two of the witnesses that the state has suggested that they might call are people who have information about both defendants. And therefore they have a greater incentive now to testify against Mr. Smith, and I think that's their game to go about that. So those are the two rationales, two of the primary rationales that we have for the admissibility of that sentence.
Well, I would just simply say that while both of those rationales may be well taken, if and when those circumstances arise, I think it's speculative at this point that they would arise. And so I think the notion of raising it without having some firmer foundation, namely that the state actually has indicated an intent to offer statements or witnesses that would be subject to that sort of impeachment, I think that it's inappropriate to raise it at this stage. The other concern that it raised in my mind is that we did a Harbison on some very specific issues, namely that your client concedes that he was in the presence of Mr. Anthony before and after, and now we have the statement being made to the jury that Mr. Anthony has pleaded guilty to the murder in this case. Of course, one of the elements for felony murder is that your client was actually or constructively present, and so that's. It seems to me that if you intend to argue to continue with that statement, say in closing, that we may need to expand the Harbison a bit as well. because it seems to me that there's an inference that could be drawn in the mind of the jury that we would need to address.
I'm certainly agreeable to, if you believe that we need to do that before the closing about the expanding that in Harbison. I think that, I think it is consistent with what we said with the argument of innocence, except for the fact of him being involved with that and then afterwards. But I don't think our argument about Mr. Anthony being the actual killer is inconsistent with Mr. Smith's innocence. But I would be glad before I Harbison to have an inquiry about that before closing, if you feel that is best.
We'll talk about that again, but I just, that was the other thing that struck me is that we may need to revisit exactly what the argument would be with respect to that point, so that I understand exactly what it is that strategically has been decided in this case. With all of that being said, I'm going to allow the motion in limine. However, with leave, Mr. Brown, for you, if you, I'm going to do exactly what you suggested, Mr. Brown, namely if you wish to raise this issue again, you need to bring it to our attention and allow you to be heard on it. And if there is a basis, I certainly can envision situations where this evidence may be relevant for impeachment, and it may be admissible. But I think that we need to be alerted to those instances where you believe it is, and that we, out of fairness to the state, allow them the opportunity to be heard on the issue. All right. All right. If there's nothing further, let's go ahead and bring the jurors in. Keeping you waiting a few moments, we had matters, again, that the law requires us to take up outside the presence of the jury, and we ask that you not speculate or concern yourself about those matters. If you would check to make sure that you have your notebooks with you, and I believe that we are now ready to proceed with further evidence from Detective Falk. Detective, if you'll resume your seat, sir. Detective, do you recognize you're still under oath, sir?
Yes, sir.
Very good. Mr. Waller?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Detective Paul.
Good morning.
Yesterday, sir, when we broke off or finished for the day, I believe we were kind of still talking about the parking deck area in which you entered and looked for some car break-ins. Is that right, sir?
Yes, sir.
Other than the car break-ins in the parking deck, did you notice another area of that parking deck that had some disturbance to it as well?
There was a lobby area, and inside that lobby area were the mailboxes for the apartment building, and one of the mailboxes in there was also broken into.
How would you get to that lobby area where the mailboxes were from the parking deck?
You would have to access it through, of course, from the parking deck, and that's the only way that it could be accessed. It couldn't be accessed from, as I recall, from the outside, so it could be accessed through the interior of the building or from the parking deck area.
And from the parking deck area, was there a door that was separating the mailbox area from the parking deck area?
Yes, sir.
And was there any damage to that door? Did it appear to be unlocked, or do you recall?
I don't recall any damage. I believe it was unlocked. It just remained unlocked.
And you said you saw some damage to one of the mailboxes there. Can you describe that for us, sir?
Yes, sir. It was obvious that the outgoing mailbox had been pried open, and there was actually a multi-tool that was right there near that mailbox, which it appeared had been used to pry open the mailbox.
When you say a multi-tool, what do you mean there, Detective Hall?
The, I don't know it by any other name, but it has several different tools in it that you would open up and use, and it has like a pair of pliers on the end of it, and it may have a screwdriver or something that you could flip open and use it as well.
But that tool was found there in the mailbox area, is that right?
Yes, sir.
What could you tell if there was any items that had been taken out of that outgoing mailbox?
There were several items that we determined have been removed from that mailbox.
And what were those, sir?
There were 3 items. There was an envelope that contained a state employee's credit union check, another envelope that contained another state employee's credit union check, and a third envelope also containing a state employee's credit union check. Each of the checks, of course, were made payable to different businesses.
And so those checks were still there on the scene?
Yes.
Anything else you noticed there, sir, in the mailbox area?
No, not in that area. No, sir.
What did you do next, Detective Falk?
We continued throughout that day just to work on the car break-ins in the area, and as we were going throughout the day, more break-ins were being discovered. Someone would call and say, hey, my car's been broken into, and they live right in that same area. So it's, as people got up and got moving for the day, I think they determined that their car had been broken into. So there were a couple that as we were out working on this that we learned about throughout the course of the day. And
at this point in the investigation, Detective Falk, could you tell if there was any direct link between the car break-ins and the homicide that had occurred at the Allister apartments?
Not at this point. We couldn't tell. We suspected that it might be. That's the reason, of course, that we were looking at this at the same time that we were also investigating the scene. But at this point, we weren't sure.
And you said you suspected that it might be. What were some of the clues or thoughts that you had that it might be related to the homicide?
Well, just the fact that the murder was an apartment that was broken into, and the apartment that was broken in, there was another apartment right up under the victim's apartment that was also broken into, and in the immediate area of that were several cars that were broken into, and it all happened on the same night.
Yes. What else did you do that day, Detective Falk?
On that day, again, related to one of the car break-ins, it just happened that the owner of one of the car break-ins was a friend of the victim, and I spoke with her, Jemay Avent.
And I believe you told us a little bit about what she said yesterday. Is that right?
I believe I did, yes, sir.
And also Claire Reynolds, you mentioned her
Right.
yesterday.
Right.
And she was the lady that told you about the iPod.
Correct.
And Esther Hall, you spoke with her as well, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. The general descriptions that she gave you I can't remember if you mentioned that yesterday or not. Could you give us those general descriptions of the individuals she saw outside of her house?
Give me 1 minute to find it. Do you know what page it is?
That's fine. There was one you mentioned yesterday, I believe. She mentioned one of the suspects she saw wearing a specific color of shorts.
Yeah, I think she described one of the suspects as wearing orange shorts, orange or reddish shorts. I just can't find it right now.
Detective Falk, if I may approach the witness stand, Your Honor.
Yes.
I'm going to show you what has been previously introduced as State's Exhibit Number 5. If I may ask Detective Falk to step back.
Yes, sir.
Fair to say, Detective Falk, you were kind of in charge of the break-in portion of this investigation during the day of May 14th, 2013.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So do you recognize the general area depicted on this diagram?
Yes, sir.
Okay. If you can kind of just orient us a little, and we've shown this map to the jury before, but kind of as we close on the breaking and entering part here, if you can just kind of orient us to where the victim's apartment was, and then these general car break-ins that you dealt with.
So of course this is I-440, the belt line, 6 Forks Road, running north and south. The victim's apartment here. This of course is the off-ramp. And the parking deck that we've been talking about is under this building here, so you would drive in and you could access it down in this area. The lobby area where the mailboxes were is right here where you see this kind of crosswalk area. There were several more break-ins. There was one, as I recall, in this building here. And then this is Penley Circle. There were a couple down in here. Miss Avent that I talked about, she lived here. And I believe that probably covers it as far as the car break-in.
So all the car break-ins were down in this Allister Drive area that we see here towards the kind of the bottom of the map, and then also the Penley Circle area that we see here.
Yes, sir.
And do you recall if there were any car break-ins up here around Rolston Drive?
I don't think there were any on Ralston Drive.
You mentioned a suspicious person call that came in at some point during the night. Where was that suspicious person call?
He was, the caller said he saw the two suspicious people on Bellevue, which is right here. And as he was getting home, he took 6 Forks to Bellevue, and he saw him in this area here.
And that call came in prior to the first car break-in call?
Right.
All right, and you mentioned the lobby area, the mailbox area. That's also in this building here that you
Yes, sir.
described where the parking deck is.
Right.
Generally speaking, Detective Falk, how far is it from the area of these car break-ins up to the victim's apartment?
Oh, it's all within walking distance. Matter of fact, we pretty much just parked and walked the whole day. No more than a quarter mile. So.
And we've heard some testimony about some fences being up around the construction site. Can you tell us a little bit more about where those fences were and how they would impede foot traffic?
Yeah, so I think you could access it, but of course, all where you see where it is on this map here was all kind of fenced off. I think you probably could go around this way, but the most logical way would be to come up through here. And I think there was a fence that actually ran along in here. So to go around the corner, we actually, this house here, I recall walking down through here, so I know you could access it around here to get to the victim's apartment.
And when you say that house, are you referring to that house that appears to have a swimming pool in the
Yes,
backyard?
sir.
All right. Thank you, Detective Falk. In regards, switching now, I guess, from the car break-in aspect of your investigation to more of the homicide investigation, starting with, I guess, with May 14th, can you just kind of generally tell us a little bit about what you did to assist in the homicide investigation?
Sure. So it had been determined that the apartment that was located below the victim's apartment, of course, was used as an office for Kane Realty for that apartment complex. And there were several items that were stolen from that apartment building or that apartment, including, it appeared, 2 laptop computers were stolen from that business.
And did you assist other Raleigh detectives in trying to locate those computers?
Yes, sir.
And specifically, which detective did you work with in general?
Detective Morse, I say was probably the one handling the stolen computers, mostly.
We haven't met Detective Morse yet, but he's a detective that always wears a bow tie.
That's right.
Tell us a little bit about how you helped or what specific jobs you had regarding helping Detective Morse.
So, of course, we were just trying to track down the computers, and if there was anything that we could do to locate them, some computers, laptops, iPads have a GPS capability nowadays, to see if they were pawned or anything like that, just to try to locate any of the stolen property.
And were you able to get a list of the stolen property that was taken from the downstairs apartment?
Yes, sir.
And who did you get that list from, sir?
An employee at Kane Realty. Communicated with her several times. Her name's Blair Owens.
If I may approach the witness, Ron.
Yes.
Detective Falk, I'm approaching you with what has been marked as State's Exhibit number 15. Do you recognize that document, sir?
Yes, sir.
What does that document appear to be?
That is a kind of a spreadsheet of items that were stolen during this case, with also some handwritten notes of mine at the bottom, on the bottom of it.
And you mentioned that in terms of looking for these items, you used serial numbers and other identifying information to try and locate these items. Is that right, sir?
Yes, sir.
And are the serial numbers that are listed on this spreadsheet consistent with the information that you were given and the attempts that you used to, or consistent with the attempts that you used to locate these items?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you, sir. How about in terms of looking for other other law enforcement officers if they may have seen anything out there that night. Did you take any steps to retrieve any video in that regards, Detective Falk?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about that, sir.
All of our patrol cars, or most of them anyway, are equipped with video cameras, and the process for requesting or getting those that video footage is through our Internal Affairs Department. So I made that request and got those videos from Sergeant Hall, who at the time was working in Internal Affairs.
And in gathering all those videos from all those Raleigh Police Department vehicles, were you able to see anything of value in terms of?
Unfortunately not, no sir.
Kind of going back to the, and I apologize for getting us off track there a little bit, going back to the serial numbers and the property stolen from the downstairs apartment, between yourself and Detective Morse, were you eventually able to locate a stolen item from the downstairs apartment?
Yes, sir.
And which item was located?
We were able to locate one of the computers.
Do you recall which computer was located first?
There was a gray computer and an orange computer that were stolen, and we were able to get the gray computer first.
And how about, did you become aware of the orange computer and where it may be?
Yes.
How did you become aware of the orange computer?
It was listed on Craigslist, and we were able to locate that ad, that Craigslist ad, and made contact with the person who put that item for sale on Craigslist.
Who was that individual, Detective Falk?
His name was Michael McCullum.
And during the course of this investigation, did you have the opportunity to speak with Michael McCullum about his involvement with those laptops?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Was he cooperative with you in that investigation?
Yes, sir.
And was at least the gray laptop, where was it found?
It was found at his residence in Wake Forest.
After you spoke with Mr. McCullum, did you have the opportunity to speak with other individuals involved in this case?
Yes, sir.
Who did you speak with next?
I spoke with Ronald Anthony.
And let me back up and go through a little timeline with you. When was Michael McCullum spoken with?
That was on May 21st of 2013.
What time did you speak with him, if you have that noted, Detective?
It was approximately 6:30 p.m. on that date.
And where did you speak with Mr. McCullum?
That was at the Atlantic Avenue Police Station.
And so say that date again for us, sir.
May 21st.
Of 2013.
Correct.
And about 6:30 p.m.
Yes, sir.
After speaking with him and getting information from him about those laptops, you said you spoke with Ronald Anthony. When did you speak with Ronald Anthony?
We started that interview at approximately 8 p.m. that same date.
Again, on May 21st
Yes, sir.
of 2013. How long did you speak with Ronald Anthony?
I don't have it noted, but as I recall, it would have been, it wasn't continuous, but over the course of about 4 hours.
Did you go into the date of May 22nd of 2013?
Yes.
And I don't want you to tell me anything specifically that he said at this point, but during the course of your conversation, did you get some further information about the orange laptop?
Yes.
And did you pass the information about the orange laptop on to other detectives?
Yes.
And similarly, during that conversation, did you get some information about the victim's iPhone, Melissa's iPhone?
Yes, sir.
And was that information passed on to other detectives?
Yes, sir.
Were you involved with the recovery of those two items, Detective Falk?
No, sir.
Other detectives were.
Yes.
After speaking with Mr. Anthony, did you have any further involvement in this case, Detective Falk?
No, sir. I apologize. I was involved in doing a final walkthrough of the crime scene, but after that, that was it.
And when you do that, we've heard a little bit about CCDI and kind of their crime scene investigation process. Has that process been completed when you release the apartment to, say, an owner, or in this case, the apartment company?
Yes, sir.
May I approach the witness again, Ron?
Yes.
Detective Falk, I'm handing you what has been previously marked as State's Exhibit 16. If you'll take a look at that document, tell me if you recognize what that is.
Yes, sir, I do.
What is that?
That's a photograph of Ronald Anthony.
And does that photograph fairly and accurately depict how Ronald Anthony looked when you saw him on, or interviewed him on May 21st and into May 22nd of 2013?
Yes, sir.
Any changes or alterations?
No, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 16 into evidence for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? It's allowed.
And permission to publish that.
Yes.
Publish that photograph. Detective Falk, is that Ronald Anthony as he appeared on that day, sir?
Yes, sir.
May I have just a moment, Sean?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Detective Falk. I don't have any further questions at this time.
Cross-examination.
Detective Falk.
Morning.
Got a couple things I want to follow up with you about. To start out with, you told us at the beginning that the way the homicide investigations are structured, the detectives work on teams.
Correct.
And so you had, I think you said that it was a team of about 5 people you were working with. And is that sort of just, that was your unit at the time, or there's a specific unit per case?
No, there are 2 homicide teams, and each team has 5 detectives and a sergeant.
So your team handled this case?
Correct.
So who were all of the detectives who were on your team at that time, if you remember?
Yeah, it was myself, Detective Morse, Detective Brady, Detective Gibney, and Detective Gill.
Okay. And, okay. And so I would think that part of working on a team like that is that everybody's working on sort of different pieces, and then you kind of bring it all back together and figure out what the next set of tasks are going to be.
Sometimes it just kind of depends on the case, but yes.
Okay. And this case had a lot of different pieces.
A couple.
And so the team meetings that you would have, or that may not be what you call them, but you've mentioned sort of several meetings that occurred over the course of this case. Everybody would bring back sort of what they gathered and sort of talk about it and see how that changed the big picture of what you knew about the case.
Typically, yes.
I'd like to first ask you a few questions. So, Mr. Anthony, that picture that we just saw, did you take that picture of Mr. Anthony?
I don't recall. Probably not. Probably CCBI.
So CCBI, there have been several pictures admitted in this case, and CCBI has taken many of them. Does CCBI take most of the pictures, do you think, in the course of an investigation like this?
Typically, yes, ma'am.
But do the other officers that are involved also take pictures through the process of it, if it's of something that they think is important, or do you take pictures?
Sometimes maybe, just depends on the circumstance. If CCBI, not available for some reason, or, just depends.
But you certainly have the ability to take pictures if you need to?
Yes.
Okay. When Mr. Anthony was arrested, were any items taken sort of from his, like, was property taken from him at the time of his arrest?
I don't have it noted if any personal property was taken from him or not. So I'm not sure.
So you don't remember anything about his shoes at the time of his arrest?
I don't recall anything about his shoes specifically, no, ma'am.
Okay. And is there a chance that that would have been something that happened with CCBI or whoever was taking the pictures, or you just have no idea?
It's possible. That's possible.
Okay. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the parking area
Yes, ma'am.
that you have talked about with the jury and shown on the map. And the jury has seen the map a number of times. So that is sort of the larger condominium building that in that photograph is at the edge of where the construction area was.
Right.
And there was a parking area that's essentially underneath that condominium.
Right.
And it's accessed by pulling into that sort of parking lot in the back.
Right.
And I believe that you described at the beginning, I think, of your testimony about that, you actually sort of called what you were with another officer or detective. Were you there with Detective Gibney?
Yes.
That you and Detective Gibney saw something that you described as tool marks?
Yes.
And so that is not a term that we all use in our sort of everyday. And so I just wondered if you could tell the jury briefly what, as a detective, what do tool marks mean?
Right. Just a pry mark where it appears that a tool and not your hands, were used to open up something.
So the marks that are left behind when a tool is used.
Correct.
And are there people at the SBI and the CCBI that do analysis of tool marks?
There are people that do that, yes, ma'am.
And so that's part of why it's sort of a term, because it's something that you may collect evidence about in the course of investigations sometimes.
Yes.
So and I see you have a copy of at least part of your report up there.
Yes, ma'am.
And does the copy of your report that you have, is it date stamped like it was in the discovery, or does it just have the page numbers from RPD?
Page numbers.
May I approach, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Your Honor, it occurs to me I should have asked you a question before we started today. And we should probably be heard on that. It'd be very brief.
All right. All right, so ladies and gentlemen of the jury, there's a matter I need to take up outside the presence of the jury, so I'd ask you step in the deliberation room. Please leave your notepads and recall the rules, and in particular, don't discuss the case among yourselves. Yes, ma'am, Ms. D.
I apologize for before, and I apologize for not remembering this morning, but I did want to clarify before I questioned Detective Falk about the court's view of times when the defense might have exhibits to refresh a witness's recollection or something of that nature, but nothing that we would intend to introduce or publish clearly during the state's case. But I know that some judges have strong feelings about even whether or not us just showing these exhibits and having them identified or a foundation laid for some of them, if that is part of the issue with any of the witnesses, whether there's any issue of us putting on evidence at that point.
I can't make a ruling. There's certainly case law that would support that notion, that the use of evidence to refresh recollection, depending on the scope of that evidence and how it is used, can constitute the, quote, introduction of evidence for the purposes of waiving the final argument. There is also case law that discusses the appropriate use of such evidence without waiving final argument. And I can't make a general ruling until that evidence has been presented. I'd certainly caution you, as you clearly are, to be aware of the potential for that, but I can't give you an anticipatory ruling on that.
Thank you. I meant to ask this morning because some judges do have sort of blanket ideas about that, and if there were any of those, I felt like I should be aware of them before I approached with any exhibits, and I meant to ask this morning before we started.
I can tell you that the case law is nuanced on that issue. It is not an easy issue. I recognize it's a fundamental right. I believe some cases say that to make the final closing argument when appropriate, but I'll also say that the case law does not provide a clear line for the judge to use. So all I can say is just be cautious, because we'll have to determine where that line is at some point in this trial.
Thank you, Your Honor.
All right.
Thank you, Your Honor. Detective, I'm going to approach with the court's permission and show you 3 pages that have been marked defense 1, 2, and 3. They're not marked in any particular order, but if you could just look at those for a minute and see if you recognize them or you can identify them.
Yes, ma'am.
So I just have a few quick questions about that, can you look at the one that is actually from your typed report? And I believe in the third paragraph is when you make reference to the bars at the parking garage.
Yes.
And in that report, you sort of characterize them as having been pulled/pried.
Yes.
And if then you would look in the one that has the bait stamp number of 1577, and which exhibit number is that? The blue sticker on the back?
2.
2. In that one, there's a note at the top that's difficult to read, but that's talking about them as well, and I believe there that it says that their rails bent, it looks like it might say.
The bars were bent.
Bars bent.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the last of them, which I believe is the one that's marked to Defense Exhibit 1, which is page 1578. In that one, it refers to the fact that you and Detective Gibney saw tool marks there.
Yes.
And that's the same, that's consistent with what your memory was when you testified here today, was that it was some sort of tool mark.
Right.
And so sometimes you characterized it more as just pulled or bent, but at least in one of those prior references, you did refer to it as being a tool mark.
They were bent, and there was a tool mark.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
And was this, did you have any opportunity to take any photographs of what this?
CCBI was called out there, Agent Thompson, and I believe she did take photographs, but
Okay.
I haven't seen them.
All right. So your understanding was at least that somebody was supposed to come out, and your memory is that it was Agent Thompson.
And then I just saw that in my notes,
Okay.
that she responded.
Okay. And may I approach one other time, Your Honor?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as Defense Exhibit 4. May I approach?
Yes, ma'am.
And now I'm showing you what's Defendant's Exhibit 4. Do you recognize that parking area?
Yes, ma'am.
And does that appear to be the same parking area that we've been talking about?
It appears to be, yes, ma'am.
Okay. One of the items that I know was of interest during the course of this case was an iPad from the downstairs rental unit apartment.
That was brought up initially, but I think it was determined that it was not stolen.
And you were the detective that was the one that basically figured out it wasn't stolen. Is that-
I spoke with one of the employees and was able to figure, yes, ma'am, that it wasn't stolen.
the same lady that you mentioned earlier that you spoke to several times from Kane Realty?
I don't recall if it was her. I can try to find it in my report if you want.
It's not terribly significant. You know somebody at Kane Realty is who gave you that information.
Right.
And you passed that information along to the rest of the team so that that item could be removed from the list of items you were looking for.
Right.
And you also, when you were having conversations with the Kane Realty employees, you collected some shoes of the Kane Realty employees
Yes, ma'am.
and turned those shoes over to Detective Brady.
Yes.
And what was the importance of collecting shoes from the Kane Realty employees?
Inside the downstairs apartment, the office, there were some noticeable shoe impressions on the carpet, and we determined who had worked since in the previous couple of days and collected the shoes that they wore when they were working there those couple of days.
And is that called a process of elimination?
Right.
So you collect those shoes to make sure that they do not match or have characteristics in common with the prints that are at the scene?
That would be the intention. Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned Mr. McCullum, and without any of the content of your conversation with him, I believe you characterized him as being anxious to cooperate, very much interested in cooperating.
He was cooperative. Yes, ma'am.
And he provided a fairly large amount of information in the course of his interview.
Yes, ma'am.
And he also had some phone records that he talked about with you in the interview.
Yes, ma'am.
And you also mentioned your interview with Mr. Anthony, and that it was quite long.
Yes.
And that it wasn't continuous.
That's right. There were breaks and times of no conversation.
Right. There were times of no conversation when he was in there even by himself.
Right.
And there was at least one break where he wanted to go outside with you and smoke cigarettes.
Right.
And when you were talking about your involvement, I know you didn't mention anything that had to do with the Oxford location. Did you not participate in any of the work at the Oxford location?
I did not go up there. No, ma'am.
May I have just a second, Your Honor?
Yes.
If I could retrieve.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Your Honor. You don't have anything.
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. If I may approach again.
Yes.
Detective Paul, State's Exhibit 15 that you identified earlier, does that, in that document, does it indicate the locations in which the orange laptop and the gray laptop were purchased?
Yes.
Okay, and did you make those notes yourself, Detective Paul?
Yes.
And any changes or alterations to this document since you created it, sir?
No, sir.
Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 15 into evidence.
Any objection?
No, sir.
It's allowed.
Based on that document, Detective Falk, where was the orange laptop and the gray laptop purchased?
The orange laptop was purchased, as she recalled, at a Best Buy, but she didn't recall which one. The gray laptop was purchased at the Best Buy in Cary at the Crossroads Shopping Center.
And in the course of your investigation and trying to determine how to identify these laptops, did the area in which, or the store in which they were purchased, end up giving you any information in terms of locating the laptops?
I believe they did. I know we got some information. I believe it came from Best Buy.
The serial numbers did you help determine which serial number was associated with the orange laptop versus the gray laptop?
Yes.
And were you able to determine by researching the serial numbers which serial number identified the orange laptop?
Yes, sir.
Tell us a little bit about that, Detective Falk.
We, when it was determined that a Craigslist ad was posted of an orange laptop computer, we could see in one of those photographs from that post a serial number, and we were trying to determine if that matched up to our stolen computer. And the serial number that we had was EB33079642. We were able to link that with a model number that was determined was the color orange, so it was an orange computer.
So that was verified through your research?
Yes.
You mentioned in your earlier testimony that you had interactions with Michael McCullum and that he was the one that in fact had one of the laptops early on.
Yes, sir.
Were you involved, and you mentioned he was involved with the Craigslist posting, were you involved with the intended initial meeting with Michael McCullum out in Wake Forest?
No, sir.
Ms. D asked you about the shoes and the purpose for collecting shoes that came through the apartment. Were you responsible for collecting the Kane Realty shoes? Realty company employee shoes, I should say.
Yeah, I actually made contact with the employees, but another detective went and actually collected those items.
Thank you, Detective Falk. I don't have any further questions, Your Honor.
Recross? All right, thank you, sir. You may step down. Any objection to this witness being excused? Sir, you're excused from your subpoena. You're free to go. Further evidence for the state?
Your Honor, this time the state calls Detective Drawn.
Please solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I swear.
Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Ms. Shakita.
Please state your name, sir.
Detective Drawn, Raleigh Police.
And Detective Drawn, how long have you been with the Raleigh Police Department?
For over 12 years now.
How long have you been assigned to the Detective Division?
For over 5 years.
Back in May of 2013, were you assigned to a particular unit within the Detective Division?
Yes, ma'am.
And what was that division?
The unit? I think it was the Special Victims Unit at that time.
We've heard a lot of testimony over yesterday and today about the homicide that occurred at 441 Allister, and from several of the members of the homicide unit. Were you asked to assist in regard to this investigation?
Yes, ma'am.
And is that uncommon, that is, that the homicide unit will request other detectives from different divisions or units to assist?
No, ma'am.
Do you recall when it was that you first got involved in this investigation?
I believe it was May 14th of 2013.
And what were your assignments or requests at that time?
I was requested by Lieutenant Limper, a lieutenant at the time, to respond to the area of the crime scene and to begin canvassing convenience stores and gas stations in the area in attempt to identify locations that would have video surveillance footage.
And so how did you go about starting that process?
Essentially, I responded to the area of Ramblewood Drive and Ralston Drive, which is in close proximity to the crime scene itself, but was not within the interior of the secured area.
You want me to approach the witness real quick?
Yes.
Detective John, we've been using States Exhibit 5 as an overall map of the area. Using States Exhibit 5, can you generally point out, here's Rainbow up here at the top,
Essentially, I responded to this area right here.
right there at the corner of Ralston and Ramblewood?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And once you got to that location, what did you do?
I used a cell phone app on my department self-issued cell phone. That app was called
around me. And I use that app to identify gas stations and convenience stores in the area, bank and financial institutions in the area, and then fast food restaurants in the area. I guess the reason I chose those styles of business is due to my experience knowing that it's common for those type of locations to have video surveillance footage.
And so once you were able to get those kinds of banks, I think you said convenience stores or gas stations and food, fast food areas, what did you do?
At that point in time, I formulated a list of those locations and then basically started responding to each of those locations. My assignment in specifics, they weren't really requesting me to view any video surveillance footage. They wanted me to just respond to this location, establish a point of contact, determine whether or not they did have video surveillance footage, and if they did, was there interior video surveillance footage only? Was there exterior video surveillance footage only, or was there interior and exterior video surveillance footage? And then the hours of operations for that business, so that one of our other detectives could follow up at a later point in time or throughout that day, that had thumb drives, so on and so forth, the capability that would be able to store some of these large files.
And at the time that you were asked to do this by Lieutenant Limper, were there any suspects in the case, or was it fairly new in the investigation?
It was fairly new in the investigation, and I didn't know of any suspect information when I was asked. Again, being in a different unit, you're not as privy to the inside information, if you will.
Once you made the list of those types of stores to go to, did you actually physically go to each and every place, or would you call them? Tell us what you did.
I responded to, I think, I identified somewhere at the end, I think it was 41 different businesses. I responded to 13 of those businesses. 2 of the businesses ended up that the Around Me app was telling me was in the area, was essentially the same business. So it ended up knocking it down to like 41 businesses instead of 42 that it originally provided me with. And I went to 13 throughout my shift that day, speaking with and making contact with the employees there to determine that information.
And I think you said that you weren't asked to retrieve it, the footage itself, or view it. Were you requested to pass that information along to other investigators?
Yes, ma'am.
And did you, in fact, pass along the information that you got?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you have any other requests or provide any other assistance to the homicide unit in this case?
No, ma'am.
I don't have any further questions.
Cross-examination?
No questions.
Very good. Thank you, sir. You may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Any objection to this witness being released?
No, sir.
Sir, you're released from your subpoena. You're free to go.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Further evidence for the state?
State calls Michael Langley.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, sir. Please be seated.
Ms. Shakita?
Please state your name, sir.
It's Michael Langley.
And Mr. Langley, how are you employed?
I am a maintenance supervisor at Allister North Hills Apartment Community.
How long have you been working with the Allister apartment community?
I started there in February of 2013.
And we've heard a lot about sort of the construction of the Allister. Were you in it from, say, the beginning as people were moving in?
I was hired early in the phases to kind of transition from the construction to the management side.
Okay.
Yeah.
And can you tell us a little bit of your responsibilities as the supervisor there?
During construction, I worked with the construction company and did inspections for final inspections for turns of the units to the management company. And after we opened the first buildings, my responsibilities were to take care of the community and the facilities part.
Earlier in the testimony of some of the construction workers, they had indicated to the jury that in May of 2013 that there was one building that was in the process of being occupied. There were several tenants. Are you familiar with the building I'm talking about?
Yes, that was 441 Allister Drive.
And you said that once the buildings were turned over, which is what we've learned about during the course of this testimony, people could rent them, you actually were involved with making sure that things were running smoothly. Is that safe to say?
Yes, ma'am.
During the course of your work, specifically in May of 2013, did you come to know Melissa Huggins-Jones?
I did.
And during the time that she moved in, I think there's been testimony late April, right around the beginning of the month of May. Do you know whether she was having any concerns about the functioning of her apartment?
I do remember there were a couple times that I was called to her apartment. One was for a washer issue. That was a minor issue. And another one was for air conditioning.
Do you recall about when the air conditioning issue was presented to you?
My first recollection is when it was on May 11th. I got a call about 5:30 in the afternoon, and from the leasing office that Ms. Huggins had called and stated that the apartment was warm. So I went over that within probably 10 or 15 minutes and adjusted the thermostat and checked the temperature coming out of the registers, and it was operating normal at the time.
And were there any additional calls after that time?
There was. She had actually contacted me either that evening or the next day and stated that it was still having issues. So I asked her if it would be okay if I come by on Monday to take a look at it with the construction company.
And that Monday, were you able to go by and view it, do you recall?
I did. I had one of the construction workers, one of the superintendents, went with me, and we looked at the air conditioning and adjusted the thermostat again and checked to make sure everything was operating properly.
And at that time, can you describe whether it was or what was going on with it at that point?
We have programmable thermostats, and they were kind of difficult to operate if you're not really familiar with them. And that seemed to be the problem, is that the thermostat was adjusted that again, and everything seemed to be fine. We did put gauges on the machine and make sure that the equipment, make sure everything was functioning properly, and it was.
And that was the Monday, which would have been the
Monday.
day before her death. Does that sound about
Yes,
right?
ma'am.
After you went by and checked it on that Monday, did she call you that evening, for example, or did you have any other concerns?
No, I didn't have any more contact with her after that.
And you said that it appeared to be an issue with the programmable thermostat. Did you show her how to use it, or tell us what you did?
Yes, I did on Saturday evening, and showed her how to use it. And then it's very complicated system, and if you're not familiar with it, and we actually still have tenants that move in today that we have to train on those. We have since put the instructions on our resident portal.
Okay, because it is that complicated.
It is pretty complicated, yeah.
And the apartment where Ms. Huggins-Jones was living, what was directly below that apartment?
We use that as a temporary leasing office.
Or at the time?
At the time, yes, ma'am.
And you said that downstairs was the leasing office. At some point during your work there, did you realize that Ms. Huggins-Jones had been killed?
The morning that it happened, I was called by Kane Public Safety and was notified that there was an incident. I didn't know what the incident was until I arrived. And when I arrived, I was told what had happened.
When you would go over there and try to assist Melissa with either the thermostat or kind of figuring out her issues, did she ever provide you with any concerns for her safety or anything like that?
No, ma'am.
That apartment or that apartment unit itself, does it have a balcony?
It does.
And what are the other options of ingress or egress to that individual apartment?
Just the main entrance door and the breezeway on the first floor.
And on the balcony, what type of door is on the balcony?
It's a sliding glass door.
I don't have any further questions, Judge.
Cross-examination.
On May 14th, the only apartment that you went in connection with this case was the downstairs apartment, is that correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Anything further?
No, sir.
Sir, you may step down. Thank you.
Thank you.
No objection.
Sir, you're released from your subpoena and you are free to go.
Thank you.
Further evidence for the state?
State calls Elizabeth Kirby.
Place your left hand on the Bible and raise your right, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you give this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you, ma'am. Please be seated.
Ms. Shakita?
Please state your name, ma'am.
Elizabeth Lee.
And how are you employed, Miss Lee?
I'm employed as a regional manager with Kane Realty.
Can you tell us first of all, Kane Realty, what kind of business that is?
We are a property management and developer.
And specifically, does Kane Realty have property in the area of North Hills?
Yes.
As the regional manager, what are some of your duties and responsibilities?
I oversee the team on site and make sure everything runs smoothly.
How many members are on your team? Or let me take you back to May.
Yes.
We've talked about how big this area has gotten, but back in May of 2013, were you in the same role?
I was actually the property manager on site in May.
And tell us what some of your duties were as property manager.
To oversee the leasing, marketing, maintenance, everything just I do now, but only at one site level.
And the property that you refer to, is that just the Allister apartment complex, or were you responsible for additional areas within Kane and North Hills?
Just the Allister North Hills.
When was it, if you know, that tenants first started moving into the Allister?
April of 2013.
And when a tenant would come in and, for example, was interested in looking at or seeing about their ability to move in, where was the leasing office initially?
Initially, we were on site at North Hills, and then once our first building opened, we moved into an apartment and staged it as an office model on site.
And we've heard a little bit about the leasing office at the building itself. Is that the one that was directly below Melissa Huggins-Jones' apartment?
Yes.
At the time, back in May of 2013, how many staff members would you say you had working with you in terms of being responsible for the site itself?
We had 3 in the office and 2 maintenance.
And so 3 in the office and then 2 maintenance, Mr. Langley being one of them?
Mm-hmm.
When, if at all, did you become aware of Melissa's death?
The morning of the next morning, I had a call from our corporate office.
And were you already at work, or were you on your way to
I
work?
was on my way to work.
And once you got to work, what, if anything, did you all do at that time?
I called the rest of the team, let them know what happened, told them to stay home that day. We just stayed in contact throughout the day and in contact with the detectives and the police as to what was going on.
Were you able to actually go to the leasing office that morning?
We were not allowed on site.
At some point, were you also made aware that not only Melissa had been murdered, but that the leasing office had been broken into as well?
Yes.
And were you able to walk through with officers at that time to even see kind of what might be missing?
I was not.
Okay. How at all did you determine whether or not things might be missing? When did that come about?
They asked some questions about what was there, and I believe Mike Langley walked with them. I was not ever allowed back on site.
At the time in the leasing office, were there computers that you and your staff used with the tenant or potential tenants?
Yes.
And do you recall what kind of computers they were?
Lenovo Yogas.
And how do you know that?
Because I picked them out and bought them.
Okay. Do you recall about when you would have bought them before May of 2013?
In probably January of that year when we opened our office.
And do you recall what colors they were, or were they the same color?
I think one was orange and one was silver.
And where were they typically kept in the office if there was a specific location?
In the desk drawers at night.
Were there other items at some point during the course of your investigation and maybe Mr. Langley's walkthrough that you determined might have been taken as well?
Yes, there was an iPad and a camera.
And you said that that morning when you came into work, you were trying to assist law enforcement. Were you providing them with the information about the items that might be taken?
I'm not sure that they were asking that day, but sometime in that week, yes.
And when you said that you were familiar with the laptops because you're the one who purchased them, did you actually keep sort of the boxes that they came in?
I did. I had them under my desk in our corporate office.
And is that something you typically do, keep things?
Yes. Typically keep things I don't need to keep. Yes.
And when you said that if it was not that day or some days prior, you were talking with law enforcement, did you indicate that you still had the boxes that the computers came in?
Yes.
Did you make arrangements for someone to come pick them up as well?
Yes.
At some point, were you able to go into your leasing office after Miss Melissa's death? Do you recall?
I don't think I did.
Okay. At some point, did you have an opportunity, either with me or with some folks from law enforcement, to look at how the apartment complex looked that next morning?
Yes.
You're our main approach witness.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to ask Ms. Lee to look at 4 photographs. The first is State's Exhibit 17, and ask if you recognize the area that's photographed in State's Exhibit 17.
Yes.
And what is that area?
That was the entryway.
Okay. And does it fairly and accurately represent the way the apartment entryway looked back in May of 2013?
Yes, minus the keys all over the table.
And I'll talk to you about that in a minute. And would it help to illustrate the way it looked and then something that might be unusual for you to the jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, at this time the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 17 as the entryway for illustrative purposes.
Any objection? It's allowed.
State's Exhibit 18 and 19, do you recognize those 2 photographs, and where is that photograph? Where are those photographs taken?
The apartment was 2 bedrooms and one was used as an office, and this was the office bedroom.
And looking at State's Exhibit 18 and 19, would that have been the way in which the office should have looked at the end of a business day?
No.
Okay. Other than it looking different than you would have kept it, is it the general layout, the way the office bedroom looked?
Yes.
And would it help to illustrate that to the jury?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time the state would move to introduce State's Exhibits 18 and 19 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection?
No objection.
They're allowed.
And then State's Exhibit 20, do you recognize that?
Yes, that's the living room.
Okay. And again, was that in a fashion in which you would have wanted tenants to walk into that room when they came to look at the apartment?
No.
Okay. But otherwise, does it generally show the items that were in the living room area in the leasing office?
Yes.
And would it help to illustrate that to the jury?
Yes.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce State's Exhibit 20 for illustrative purposes.
Any objection?
No objection.
It's allowed.
Your Honor, may I publish those to the jury as well?
Yes.
Corey, if you could turn around to the monitor behind you and looking at that monitor, photo should come up. State's Exhibit 17, Your Honor, may she stand?
Yes.
And I called you Miss Lee, sorry. If you could stand, you had said that there were some keys that were out of place. Can you show them where they are in State's Exhibit 17? Do you know what those keys were used for?
They were actually some extra keys we had to the office that we had to give to some other staff members.
And where were they supposed to be kept?
In a drawer in the kitchen, I believe.
So not even in that entryway?
No.
Moving to State's Exhibit 18. You said this was the desk area, the office essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And what is unusual about the way that looks as we look at State's Exhibit 18?
The desk is a mess, and you can see the boxes and paper. That wouldn't be the way they would have kept it at the end of the night.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 19?
The same thing, it's just a wreck.
Okay. And on the top, it looks like a Best Buy bag. Is that safe to say?
Yes.
Okay. And you had said that typically the laptops would be kept in the drawers of the desk. Is that the desk where they would be?
Yes.
Okay. And the drawer that's open, is that one that maybe the computer should have been in?
Yes.
Okay. And State's Exhibit 20. You had said this was the living room area. What's unusual about that in terms of the way it should have looked?
This basket was kind of filled with things and sitting on the floor over here instead of in this.
And so you said you never actually got to go back in there, but when you last saw either 17, 18, or sorry, any of those photographs of leasing office, did it look like that at all?
No.
Thank you. The layout of the apartment for the leasing office, was it the same as the one that Melissa occupied, or was it slightly different?
It was the same.
Your Honor, may I approach the witness?
Yes.
I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 21. I'm going to show you State's Exhibit 21 that looks like a layout. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And what is State's Exhibit 21?
It's a floor plan.
And is this the floor plan that was of Melissa Huggins-Jones' apartment?
Yes.
Okay. Your Honor, at this time I would ask to introduce State's Exhibit 21, and I have copies for the jurors.
Any objection?
No objection. Do you want to look at it at some point? A little bit. Make sure I'm on the right page.
Thank you, ma'am. Hold on just a second, bailiff. Any objection?
I don't have an objection.
All right, it's allowed, and bailiff, you may publish those to the jury. All right, Ms. Shakita.
And again, you said the one below it and the one on top were exactly the same.
Yes.
Ms. Lee, you had said that you made arrangements to get the Lenovo laptop boxes to the police department. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
May I approach?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm going to show you two boxes, the first of which is marked as State's Exhibit 22. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
And then State's Exhibit 23. Are those the two boxes that you made arrangements to get to the Raleigh Police Department?
Yes.
You said they were under your desk?
Mm-hmm.
Other than getting them to the police department, did you empty them in anywhere, or did you just hand them over?
I just handed them over.
And do they appear to be in the same condition as when you handed them over?
Mm-hmm.
Your Honor, this time the state would move to introduce State's Exhibits 22 and 23 into evidence.
Any objection?
No objection.
They're allowed.
During the course of the investigation with the police, let's proceed. During the course of the investigation, were you attempting to assist the police department with, for example, with serial numbers for things that were taken from the downstairs unit?
Yes.
May I approach, Judge?
Yes.
I'm going to show you what's been marked as State's Exhibit 15 that earlier Detective Falk had identified as a list of items that they were looking for. And on there, can you see the Lenovo laptops? One's marked silver and one's marked orange.
Yes.
Were you able to get them as best you could, the serial numbers, either from the box or from the information that you had?
Yes.
And he had even made notes on there and was saying that they were bought at Best Buy at different times. Is that your recollection as well?
Yes.
Okay. And lastly, Ms. Lee, State's Exhibit 24. May I approach the clerk for some?
Yes.
I know that you probably don't recognize this brown paper bag with lots of writing on it, but I'm going to open up the bag itself and see if you recognize the contents. I'm going to make as much noise as I possibly can. Okay. Right in front of you. I'm going to ask if, looking at this, if this laptop, which I'll mark as State's Exhibit 24A, does that appear to be one of the Lenovo laptops that you purchased?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you know that this might be one of the ones? Did you pick out this laptop yourself?
Yes.
And why did you choose this laptop, for example?
Because of its ability to flip into a tablet.
The other silver and color laptop, did it also have that capability as to flip into a tablet?
Yes.
And after providing the information that you had in terms of identifying information from either the laptop, the iPad, did you stay in communication with the police department and trying to assist them in any way you could?
Yes.
At some point, did investigators talk to you or your staff about whether there was any sort of GPS or anything enabled on that to try and see if they could locate this?
Yes.
And to the best that you were able, did you provide the information that you knew about the computer?
Yes.
Were there any, you had indicated that an iPad initially you thought had been taken. Did you find out later something else about that iPad? Do you recall?
I don't recall.
And a camera, was there a camera that was also taken?
Mm-hmm.
And to your knowledge, was that recovered?
No.
Do you recall what type of camera it was? And it may be on that sheet right in front of you. Do you still have 15 up there in front of you?
Canon, digital, small camera.
And why did you all have the camera there on site?
So we could take pictures of units and post them to the internet to show them first lease.
And again, were you able to provide the police department with serial numbers and things of that nature in an attempt to try and find those?
I don't think I did. I think the boxes were still left in the office.
And so that was something that they could use.
Mhm.
I don't have any further questions. Hold on, sorry.
Can we just have a quick break, Your Honor?
Yes, we can go ahead and do that now. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and take a mid-morning recess until 25 minutes till 12. Please recall all the rules and instructions. Don't talk among yourselves or with anyone else about the case. Don't form or express opinions about the outcome. No media or independent investigation into these matters, and no conversations whatsoever with any parties, witnesses, or lawyers. Again, those of you who wish to use the elevators, if the bailiff will accompany you to the elevators, and if everyone else would remain seated while the jurors excuse themselves, please leave your notebooks in your chairs, as well as the exhibit that was given to you, if you'll leave all of that in your chair. The jury, are there any matters that we need to take up?
No.
All right. We'll be in recess then until 25 minutes till.
Superior Court stands in recess till 11:35.